Hello there. My name is Guy McMillan. I'm sitting here with David Chase. We had a program on this station about 30 years ago, I guess.
At least, yeah.
And we forgot to come back. And so here we are now, 30 years later, talking about something else, something totally different. Our earlier show, some may remember, was called Brattleboro Tonight. Today we're going to talk about David Chase's book, which has recently come out in a paperback edition. It's also available on Kindle, and it's called Grant's Ferry, and we'll get into that in a couple of minutes. But for those that may not remember David, who used to live here in Brattleboro, and to hear him talk anyway, ran pretty much everything. Weren't you even on the Board of Selectmen at one point?
No, I ran for selectman and lost just before they tried to fire the police chief. So that was kind of a bonus, but I got on the planning commission.
You were on something, I know.
I was on the planning commission for 10 years, and then I helped start BCTV. Yeah.
Well, he had a column in the Brattleboro Reformer, and I'll just mention it quickly because it has been a number of years. Later, it kind of migrated over to the Keene Sentinel, and then it went away. But when it was in the Reformer, I remember the first time. I didn't know David. I don't think I'd ever met him, and I would read his column, but maybe not every week. I'd see it. And the column that I remember the most was the first one that I read all the way through, which was about David on his way to work or wherever he was going, and he got a speeding ticket. And he spent the whole 700 words of his column complaining about this speeding ticket, and don't the cops have anything better to do? And I remember thinking at the time that if you had a column in the newspaper, what a wonderful way to use it to further your own interests and get back at people that you didn't like or whatever. So that was good. Later, when I was doing Brattleboro Tonight, after the first year, I had taught at Brattleboro High School for 9 years, I think, 7 or 9 years. And actually it would be 7, 8, or 9 years probably.
I wasn't there.
No, you weren't there, but it was a period of time in the 1970s. And I can remember we did this program, this Brattleboro Tonight show, and I had former students come and play all the roles on the program because I didn't know anybody else. And I guess David figured that out, and he called me up one night at home, and he said that he knew some adults in Brattleboro. And I thought that was very perceptive. And so he brought in adults, and from then on, he pretty much populated the cast, and I just interviewed the people as Roger Bland.
Well, once I saw the first shows, I thought it would be a great promotion thing for BCTV if instead of if we could get people who are known in the community to come on and be the guests, because it would legitimize everything we're doing here. If they came on and played, then everybody would want to play.
Well, it made sense. So the people we had on were wonderful people, but they were all 18 years old, and therefore not as well known probably as the judge and the fire chief
and the town attorney.
There were very few people that we didn't get on that program and then embarrass the dickens out of. Anyway, from there, David went on and has been married and lived in England and lives in Keene now. But one never knows. And during this period, he wrote this book, which I've already held up once, and you'll see later, called Grant's Ferry. And this is Grant's with no apostrophe, and there's a reason for that you get when you read the book. This is a book that a lot of people have said that they were going to read it, but they thought they probably might not like it, and they didn't want to tell David that, and so they didn't read it. And I read it, and I think it is a really excellent book. It's a novel, and it deals with people, not caricatures. These are not, this isn't a, what's the name of that company that makes the pies and cakes?
Pepperidge Farm.
Yeah, it's not a Pepperidge Farm kind of book. It's a real story about a town in Vermont, and it's a great book. So I put in my pitch for it now. And I would ask how this sort of took place. How did you start thinking about this? How do you put together a book? How do you figure out what you want to write about?
Well, I kind of thought for a long time that, well, I wrote the newspaper column for so long, and
Yeah, but that's 600 words at a shot.
well, I know. Well, I was going to get to it. I mean, I put in for a residency at the Millay Colony for the Arts out in Austerlitz, New York, and I won it. And it's a month where you get to go out and just be there and do whatever you want to do.
Great.
And I'd never done anything like that. And when I got out of the car that afternoon when I arrived, she said, "Now, first of all," she said, "you know, a lot of people get here and they want to write their first chapter before supper." She said, so get that out of your mind. And then later they told me that my time there was not about producing anything. That their philosophy was that if I spent the month there, eventually that time would show up. They were confident in that, and so I could spend the whole month walking in the woods, and it wouldn't matter to them what I did. But what I did while I was there was I taught myself to write long, because I'd written a column for so long that every time I got to page 4, it's time to end it. So I spent most of the month working on how do I figure out timelines, for one thing, because I mean it was going to be over a period of time, whatever I did, and to write a long piece. And I finally wrote something about 25 pages, I think, which was a scene that parts of it are in here, but most of it is gone now. But the thing is, I taught myself to write long.
Did you also think, I'm going to write about a Vermont town and I'm going to create these characters?
Well, it was about, I knew that I wanted it, there was going to be about a small town, probably in decline. It was going to be about people coming in and making a change.
That happened.
The first idea I had was people from outside coming in to make the change, you know, and I, that seemed to go away. And then I eventually had it to this guy, Kenneth, who goes away and then comes back. It seemed to be another, a different twist, something that would, because he's all very familiar with the town, right? But he
well, he was familiar with the town when he was a teenager.
Right,
He left very young.
And he gets sucked in to come back and falls into the to the rest of the story. But anyway, he had a history with it, and with some of the people who were still there.
And you had a number of people, none of whom I recognized. In other words, this is not a book where you say, "Oh yeah, he's doing a takeoff on so and so," or "This is so and so." These are people that seem like really normal, and most of them bright, and some of them not so bright. But as I say, they're not caricatures; they're real people. And by the end of this book, this is one of those books where, at the end of the book, you say, "Boy, I wish this went on further. This is pretty good." It starts off with a death, which I thought was good because I read a lot of mysteries.
Yeah.
I figured somebody probably pushed her down those stairs, but it turns out no, the woman just died. Fanny.
Yeah, fair. She had I assume it was a stroke. Those are kind of the symptoms. But,
Well, if you don't know, I'm sure no one else does. But anyway, she dies, and she takes this kid, Kenneth, kind of adopts him because this actor, obviously before she died, his parents died in an automobile crash, and then it kind of goes from there. Did the story? I'm doing this because I don't know how to write a novel, and
Okay.
I like you, I've written editorials for 32 years, and they always end with a snap at the end of about 700 words. So, did the story evolve as you wrote it? Did you find that as you wrote the story, oh, this is going to happen now, or were you heading for this to happen?
Well, I always had a vague notion of the end, so I always knew where I was going to go. I didn't often know how I was going to get there.
Well, you knew what was going to happen at the end.
Right.
You knew
right.
about the...
Right, I knew about, yes. So I knew about the completion of it, and then I just had to wrap it all up. But to get there, I wasn't sure about that, and I wasn't sure about the players. While I was in England, a woman I met over there liked the way I write and hooked me up with her agent, and I met with the agent, and it eventually never went anywhere, but but she told me that the time frame was too long, and I was going to have to. I had it over 3 years, and she no. She said you got to do it in a year, and I said, well, I don't think it would work. And she said, of course it'll work. It's fiction. You can do it. Well, I went home and thought about it, and I said, well, okay, I can do it, but I got to bring a whole bunch of new people in to get the work done.
Well, is that when you brought in Fanny's ultimatum? We're speaking now.
No,
because that makes it a year.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's right. All right. So I had to go back and fix that piece about the year.
Yeah. Well, there's a 30-year gap, which struck me as a long time. A 30-year gap when Kenneth goes away.
Right.
It's not that the book doesn't sort of piddle along for 30 years. It just stops and starts again 30 years later.
Right.
And when he comes back, and meets some of the people that he knew at the time, and he brings with him some people, and there are other things that take place. This isn't an adventure story as much as it's kind of a saga about the town, and you get to see some of the people. There's a wonderful character that I told you I was very fond of. Her name was Ellen, who is a teenage girl at the beginning of the book, and then is later married to one of the town, a real jerk in the town. Although he, as most of the characters, he's a jerk that you kind of like.
Yeah, there's nobody evil.
No. Except for Jerry Falwell.
Well, yeah. I mean, yeah.
Jerry Falwell is not in the book, but his presence is in the book. Anyway, we shouldn't talk too much about this because obviously what we're trying to do is talk about the book to people who haven't read it, and this isn't probably going to get them much information about it, but I did want to know how you wrote it. And apparently you wrote it by starting with some characters and having an ending, and then you brought them together over a period of time. And I don't know, this looks like the right size for a book. Is there a point where you say, it's over, I've got enough pages? Or
well, I had a lot more than this, and one of the things that agent made me do after I cut it down to 1 year from 3 was she said, well, it's way too long, and I took 40,000 words out of it.
Okay, but it's still long.
It's still a long
but it's
book.
not long in the tedious sense. It's
Right,
just
well,
it takes a while to get to where you're going.
I think it reads pretty easily, so it doesn't seem long.
No, I agree. I read it with increasing enjoyment. It's one of those books that I started out reading because David Chase had written a book, and it wasn't much I could. Once it was on Kindle, I couldn't say I can't get it. And on Kindle, it's what, $4. So
$4.99.
Yeah, $4.99. And actually, because I'm on Kindle Prime, I could have gotten it for free if I had pushed the right button, which I didn't. But anyway, it's on Kindle. I've got the book. I got to read it, and I started out in that frame of mind, which I think a lot of people will. We can talk in a minute about local author corner of a bookstore where people go in and say, "Oh my God, I don't want to read a local author."
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I mean, I've sold some books to the Toadstool over in Keene, and some more to Everyone's Books here in Brattleboro. They've got a few. And anyway, over at Toadstool, they put them in the local author shelf, and then one of the guys said, "Well, I'll just put them over in the new arrivals bin." And so he put them over there, and they began to sell.
Yeah.
So,
because it's not just some local author.
That's right, yeah.
Sounds like local yokel, Just,
Yep.
And some of the books in that local authors section are pretty dreadful.
Yeah.
Well, I thought, I don't want to say I didn't expect much because I had seen the play and I knew you could write and it was an interesting idea. But I read it at the beginning thinking I'm going to read this now because David wrote a book. And it wasn't long before it was one of those things. I often read just before bedtime, And if I'm reading a really good book, I look forward to, reading it. And maybe I won't go to sleep as early as my wife thinks I should because I'm reading this thing, Shh. And this got to that. I enjoyed it. And I'm not telling you it's a page turner because it's not a thriller. But these people are very interesting people, and you kind of enjoy them. And some of the scenes take place at events that we're all familiar with, like the
The sugar supper,
yeah, the sugar supper, the maple sugar supper, and some of these other things.
town meeting. Yep.
Yeah, they're kind of funny when you approach them the way you do, but you don't actually try to mock or ridicule these events. You just describe them in the kind of detail that it maybe takes a little bit of distance to look at and say, "Oh yeah, that's true." You know.
Well, I don't I don't enjoy. Well, this is the kind of book that I like to read.
Yeah.
But
You see, but it's not me. I just interrupt for a second. I did like to read it, but this is not the kind of book that I seek out.
right.
You know, I seek out John Grisham if I'm looking for something fun.
Right. Well, and so I mean, it's like the play. I mean, one of the directions I gave when they were producing the play is these people are just ordinary folks doing the best they can. And so that was always my goal in this. I mean, I got a couple of. I mean, Fanny's kind of a nasty sort, but
Well, she dies before you practically.
Well,
get...
yeah, but she has a
Well,
influence on Kenneth when he's growing up. You
Yeah,
know, and
yeah,
she's,
that's
and
true.
she's a piece of work. And of all the people in the book, there were two people in my mother's family, two women, that were. I took the worst parts of both of them and put them in Fanny.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but other than that, all these people are only based on types that I know. You know, I mean, that's really how I start with a character. I pick out a type and think about what their role is going to be, and then once they begin to speak, the rest of it happens.
Well, but it happens in a way that's interesting. It's not you looking at this person that is the type. You kind of embody this a little bit. These people, the reader kind of understands these people better than he or she might have had she seen them in Grants Ferry. Which, by the way, I think Grants Ferry is south of Springfield, but I think you've got it north of Springfield.
That's in between, yeah. Actually,
Well, in between what?
in between Springfield and Windsor.
Okay. Because Grants Ferry
Across-
is not Saxon's River,
No.
which usually does have an apostrophe.
Well,
or probably
one of
should.
the things I had to take out, I had this prologue that I wrote, which I thought was brilliant, but people who read it said, God, if I saw this, I'd probably never get to the rest of the book.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I took it out. But in that, I explained that I put a hook in the river that went over into New Hampshire and back. Okay?
Yeah.
And so if this place really existed on a map, it would probably be somewhere around Claremont. Because that's why this place is out of the way, because it never was on the route on the railroad. It was never on Route 5. The interstate passed it by. I mean, everything passed it by. So when the bridge washed out in 1938, and New Hampshire, out of spite, never rebuilt it, this town had always been on the way to someplace.
New Hampshire, out of spite. New Hampshire owns the river.
I know, but
So the people of Vermont sit there and say, build it.
Right, but I mean, there's a history there that goes back a couple hundred years.
No, I know.
I don't want to spoil it.
No, I know what you're talking
It involves
about.
a cannon and everything
That's
else.
right.
But,
No, that's right.
You know, so it was out of spite that New Hampshire didn't rebuild the bridge. So now a town that was always on the way to someplace was suddenly at the end of the road. And that's one of the reasons.
Well, that's
that
Bellows
went downhill.
Falls, too, though, isn't
That's
it?
right. Well, you can talk about any number of river towns.
Well, there's a lot of that. I'm getting to beyond what I was going to discuss, and I wondered if you could read a short passage from the book. I hate it when people say, read a passage from the book when you're on television, but in this case, David has selected a passage. It's probably worth listening to. It's fun. So,
all right. Well, this is a place. Kenneth and his partner Simon have gone to a local grocery store in Grants Ferry to buy light bulbs. Kenneth is from Grants Ferry and knows small towns. Simon is from New York, Long Island, down there. He doesn't know small towns at all. So they've gone in to buy the light bulbs. So Kenneth bought every 60 and 75 watt bulb in the store. At the counter, Paul, not someone Kenneth knew, added up the charges. What are you doing there, lighting up a football field? Haunted house, Kenneth said. Lights keep the vampires away. Simon had found 2 bottles of New York State wine. What do you think, a red and a white? Was that a challenge? He turned to Paul. Well, maybe you can make a recommendation. Not much of a wine person myself, he said, but the wife and I like to try 'em all. That red's pretty rugged, but I find the white a little too tart. There's folks in town like it, though. That's good enough for me, Simon said. We also got a couple of cartons back there. He pronounced it cottons. Come with a little tap on them. Quite handy. Next time. These will do for now. Back in the car, Kenneth couldn't leave it alone. You actually bought these wines because they were described as rugged and tart? Well, with all the hair sticking out of that guy's nose, I wasn't about to ask him about the bouquet.
Well, yes.
That gives you a little exchange.
That does. And when you said cotton, I was thinking one of the things that I appreciate about this book, could have been worse, is you don't write it in a kind of dialogue, dialect.
That.
Oh, Lord, I hate that.
Yeah.
You're constantly trying to figure out what it is that the author thinks he's saying.
Yeah.
So when you say he pronounced it cottons, that's what I like. Tell me what you're doing here.
My take is that the people who have these accents don't think they have accents.
That's right. And when you read the book, you're not going to get the sense that these are a bunch of heavily accented people.
That's right.
Vermont really is no longer full of those anyway. I mean,
No, but more of it's about the rhythm and the cadence in the speeches than it is about spelling funny.
Well, it is. But I have this theory, which I won't get into because this is your program. But I have this theory that since the really the arrival of television, of national television, a lot of the accents that we had have been mitigated. People watch TV, they watch soap operas, they watch the newscasts, and they end up speaking more in the direction of these national accents than they used to. Now you have somehow avoided all that problem,
Yeah.
but the book doesn't read like you're reading it aloud. It has a Native American English read to it. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about how this thing got from your mind to a paperback book. And I know it started and it went through Kindle, and this is a whole new way to arrange publication, I think.
Well, when I finished my final draft, what I called the final draft, I shopped it out to agents and publishers for a year and a half, 2 years, and they kept saying no thank you, no thank you. And you know, I turned 71 in October. My window of opportunity is getting smaller and smaller. And so
That's why there'll be no sequel.
So I said, well, you know, I ought to go look at this self-publishing thing, and you can do it for free. I mean, you have to do a lot of work. So I did the Kindle version, and that went up on Amazon pretty easily. And then they have this other outfit that's part of Amazon called CreateSpace. And you get to do all of this. You get to do all of this for free. And the only thing I paid them was another $25 to get on some sort of extended distribution list.
When he says all of this, he means the cover,
Yeah.
the editing.
Yep.
And by the way, a lot of those Amazon self-published books are so badly edited that they drive you nuts.
Right.
This is now nicely edited, partly by me, so I can attest to that.
Yeah. Well, I had to, and basically you do it all. They've got a program that helps you work your way through it and establish the margins and all of that, and you send the file into them, and then you buy a proof copy, and if it doesn't work, they say, well, you've got some issues, and so you go back and you fix the issue. You just keep doing that until it's right. I actually wrote to them and said, listen, I've got my book up on Kindle, and I think I'd like to do the CreateSpace thing. What do you think? And they wrote back and said, well, you know, if you've done this much, you can probably do the rest. I mean, they didn't even try to sell me anything, which I was surprised.
Amazon, I think, has gotten to the point, and it's Amazon and its divisions, where there's a bigger thing going on than just you and your book. There's this whole idea that if you got a book in you, you can now get it out without convincing somebody. Because we know that the editors and the publishers are not always right. We know a lot of people famous people have tried to get books published and it didn't work.
Well, I think too, I don't know where this fits. I don't know what category I'd put this in.
New arrivals.
Yeah. but it's not like science fiction. It's
No,
not,
no,
it's
no,
not
no,
romance.
no,
It's not,
no,
you know,
no.
So
There's no hook.
no, and that's it. I mean, and I think that you know, if it had been something about zombies right now, I'd have probably sold it in 20 minutes. But you know, I have no interest in zombies, so it's not going to be.
Well, no, and I think because I've watched part of this. First, there was the Kindle book, which I did read and enjoyed so much. I actually called you up one night and said, you know, I'm liking this. Remember that?
Yeah.
And
I appreciated that.
Yeah, well, I thought you might, but I did it because I really was enjoying it. And then my wife read it. She didn't think she was going to. She read it because it was David Chase, not because I recommended it, because that would not. Never mind. But she read it, enjoyed it, liked some of the characters, so we had a good time. Now, for people that have listened to all or part of this conversation, which is coming to an end, we want to remind them, in case they haven't picked it up, you can get this book on Amazon, either the Kindle version, or you can order the paperback version through Amazon, through Barnes & Noble, locally through... what's the name of the Brattleboro store?
Everyone's Books.
Everyone's Books in Brattleboro, and Toadstool in Keene.
Now they have them, and any bookstore can order them. I mean, it's in the pipeline, so they can get them through their suppliers.
Yeah, this is not just a far away, send for it book. You can get it at any bookstore you want, locally, immediately, and a little further away, you might have to wait a while, but it's there. And of course, with the Kindle, it's immediate. Right. So there's that. There's also, if you want to find out any more about what we had to say and you missed part of it, because I know we mumble and have rushed through this, BrattleboroTV.org will have a link to this little half hour that you could...
watch again and again.
Yes, or you could get people to come over for dinner and say, now we're going to sit down and watch a shameless pitch for David Chase's new book. A lot of people will remember David from his period here in Brattleboro. We didn't mention that he was also, I guess, would you call yourself a carpenter? Or?
Yeah.
I know he hates it.
Well, I got tired of doing it.
Yeah, but he did some nice work at both of my houses. I don't have two houses, but I had a house and now I have another one. And it was all very good, and he's still not carpentering, except when Susan, his wife, needs something done.
Yeah, I like to do things every once in a while, so she thinks I'm brilliant.
So I guess that's about all we need to go into here. I think we've mentioned everything we had. And so we'll say good day to those that have watched, and thank you very much. And maybe we'll be back in another 30 years.
Yeah, maybe.